collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
We're joined on this week's programme by the new leader of the Green Party in Cyprus, outlining his priorities and his policies.
If you extend land into the sea, either you build a breakwater into the sea, automatically they can define it as a port. And if you define it as a port, it's no longer a public beach. And if it's no longer a public beach, I can give it to individuals to manage it. So it's a side way of privatizing beaches.
Well, the big news, particularly if you're an environmentalist, in the last couple of weeks was the fact that the Green Party in Cyprus has a new leader. We're very glad to say that he joins us on this week's programme to talk about the issues facing Cyprus with regard to the environment and particularly whether or not we might see a slight change of direction and what his priorities are. He is Bambos Theobemptou. Bambos, thanks for joining us on the Cyprus News Digest. Congratulations on your unopposed election as head of the Green Party. You've been in the party for many years. You're a former Commissioner for the Environment, and I know it's really a passion with you. It always has been, as far as I'm aware. We've known each other for years.
Oh, yes.
Tell us about how you now assess what you want to do and the order in which you can do it, because I'm sure you can't do everything at once.
Of course, yes. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. I've been with the Green Party since the very first day. In actual fact, the story I tell is that I remember Perdigis coming to our place at home with my wife, and he had this idea that we should discuss, and the idea was to form a political party, because from the early 1990s up to that time, up to 1996, we were a very active environmental group. Before the 1990s, we were all of us were part of the Friends of Agamas. This is where the first green action was seen by Cypriots.
But back then, I remember very well, even if you used the word perivallon to the general populace of Cyprus, you got a blank look, like, yes. What are you talking about?
Yes, exactly. We were in all the green fights, the protests and everything since 1985. So then we formed the party, and we had our first member of parliament elected in 2001.
So it took some time to really get it into people's imagination. Yeah. Was there a catalyst, do you think, about when people started to think that actually the environment does matter?
The difference I can see is the fact that at that time when we formed the Green Party, the only thing I can remember now offhand was the fact that we started discussing joining the European Union. And that was the pre-accession period. We had the accession talks, and it was, at the time, we saw rapid changes coming to the island. This gave us the ability to bring out at the forefront of the news media and to the people the ideas about the environment, because we didn't have anything before. I remember the discussions we had, and we used the examples from the European Union with regards to environmental impact assessment studies. I remember every time I went to a European country, I used to go to info points, they were called at the time, and collect all the books. And whenever we had a discussion with government officials, etc., we used to point them to this and say, this is what they do in Europe, this is what we should be doing. And it was very important for us, this process, because sometimes when you say we shouldn't be doing this, we should be doing that, it's much powerful as a discussion point to say, and this is what they do in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Sweden, in Denmark, etc. If you point out what they do It's not just a crazy idea that you had. So I think that was
The turning point.
The turning point, yes, with regards to the environment. Remember, in 2003 also was the year that we started discussing policy for the waste management, household waste management for the municipalities. So everything was brought up. We started discussing, this is the year that, the years before that we had the sewage treatment plants. We were discussing water standards, we were discussing land protection, we were discussing waste management. Later on, a few years afterwards, we started having recycling, the idea of recycling around 2004 and 2005. And this is what got me to become a commissioner, actually. And that was, these were the years of all these the years where everything was looked at. Because we had these directives that we have to implement. I remember once in Parliament I went to a committee and they were all sitting there and the piles of papers that they had next to them was they had to bend over to see over there among themselves because there were so many. And some of them were done in a hurry, actually. But, well, all these years, we ended up now with having a Green Party in Parliament with 2 members of Parliament. And I hope that the next election, which will be in May next year, will give us 3 seats.
Which brings us to your priorities and the policies. Now, what would you say were the most engaging policies that the party offers to the general public? Because still, although we have an increasing number of young people in particular who are climate action people, there are still an awful lot of older voters who just think, oh, well, I don't know, it's a lot of nonsense. So what can you offer voters that you think will appeal to them without being populist for the sake of it? Because that's the other problem we've got here, is people come up with ideas because they want to get elected, but if they're not workable ideas that will have a real impact, it's a bit of a waste of time, isn't it?
Exactly. Always we follow successful practices from other countries. Sometimes you need to adopt them, but the idea is you base what proposals on success stories from other countries. I can give you an example. We don't need to reinvent waste management. I mean, we have successful practices in Europe and in the United States as well. So, for instance, what the policy, this disastrous policy that we had about waste management to build big factories and all these stupid proposals that we had at the time, all this is going to change. Why? Because we know that what they do abroad is you separate at the source. You cannot separate automatically all this waste. So I was in the committee that formed the new law, which will be in Parliament, I hope, by September. And what we are going to do is we're going to implement what the rest of Europe does, that is sort at the source. It's recycling materials, organic waste, have more points where you take your glass, separate the organic waste and send it to a processing plant to produce biogas and then electricity and then compost. And you won't be charged any money for your waste, but you will be required to buy a bag. And the bag will be expensive.
What's the bag made of?
It might be recyclable plastic, or it might be organic, whatever.
Okay, as long as it's not plastic, because that's the other thing, is there we were years ago sticking more plastic bags into the market to say, put your recyclables here. And of course, you know, and I know, because I've been doing it for years, that separating your waste at home is so very easy to do because the quantities are small. Yes. But so that's going to impact people, because there was a time, I think, when the Greens were promoting the pay-as-you-throw idea, and that is still floating around. It's very unpopular.
It is something that it would be done in a way as a pay-as-you-throw. The idea is that you don't pay for the recycling materials that you separate at the source. You won't pay any money for collecting your separate bin with the organic waste, but you won't pay waste management, but you'll buy a bag. This is one solution.
But that's for your main rubbish, is it?
Yeah, for the remaining.
Okay.
One solution is you buy a bag. Another solution, this is not within the law, it's just that in the law it says that you have to implement a way for people to give them the incentives to separate their waste. So one way would be a bag. Another way would be a bin, that you put all your waste in a bin. The bin will have a chip, an RFID chip in it, so that when the truck comes and collects the bin, when you hook the bin on the truck, automatically it reads, this is the bin of Mr. So-and-so, our address so-and-so, on this day, on this hour, this minute, this second, I collected the bin. And then when it lifts it, it weighs the bin, and you get charged by the amount of waste that you throw.
But again, you're talking about the waste that is left over after you've recycled everything. So hopefully it shouldn't be very much.
Of course, yes.
Right, let's get on to your views as the new leader of the Green Party. You've been dealing for years with things like tyres, with bicycle lanes, with tree cutting, and I've covered that so many times in the last few months on the programme, because it seems that we have all these young groups of people trying to plant trees everywhere, and almost on a weekly basis pictures on social media of huge mature trees being cut down by municipalities or developers. Now developers, I suppose, have maybe ways of getting round it, but municipalities, I find that extraordinary, Bambos.
Yes, there are many issues. One is waste management. The other is increasing the green in the cities and in Cyprus, and we have an obligation to do this. I work with all the groups that were formed in Cyprus with regards to planting trees. The 100,000 trees in Paphos, I was there when they were formed. I went to Limassol, I went to Larnaca, I work with the Nicosia ones. And
how are they doing, if I can just interrupt?
The difficulty that we have two difficulties that we shouldn't have. Difficulty number one is we have the manpower and we don't have a place to plant the trees. And difficulty number two is we don't have trees. Government can only produce 70,000 trees a year. And they are planning to plant millions of trees. So we have to find a way to increase the number of trees. So one of the things that I have it in my agenda to do is to teach people how to
take cuttings.
Yes, how to take cuttings, how to propagate and do all these things for the trees, because we cannot wait for the government necessaries to produce, because the amount of trees they can produce is that much, 70,000 trees a year.
Okay, so this is going to be a very long-term thing, though, because you can't just take a cutting, root it and plant it in our climate. You've got to actually grow it to a certain height and give it a chance.
So you have to have the place to plant the trees. You have to look after it after 3 or 4 years. And you have to find the trees, of course, as I said. Okay, I interrupted you. Let's go back to where you were on your policies. So this is one thing. The second thing is public transport. The reason why this is very high on the agenda is because of the absence of public transport, we have very bad air quality here on the island. Just to give an idea how bad the air quality is, if you look at the graphs of air quality that are produced, you will see that about an hour after every traffic rush hour, you exceed all the limits. The European Environment Agency, based on the data that we supply, estimates that 600 to 800 people die prematurely on the island every year because of that. So this is one of the big issues for me, and anything that comes along with it, because you talk about public transport, you need to make people walk, you need to have cycle lanes, promote cycling, have low emission zones, have prohibitions with the cars being able to come to the center of the city.
At least now we do have some rather more advanced buses, and I've just seen that the government is going to spend a considerable amount of money on new bus stops with all the information on them, because one of the problems we've got is that people never seem to know when the next bus might turn up, and if you're in a hurry or you've got an appointment, it's not guaranteed, so that will change.
But that was in the previous plan. That was in the plan. I was part of it when it was formed 10 years ago. In 2010, we had this sustainable mobility plan for Nicosia, and it was the bus stops, the ticketing system, the walkways, the one-way streets, the prohibitions, all these were in the previous plan. 10 years they didn't do anything. So there is no guarantee that they are actually going to do anything now. And what worries me is that I started a new plan now. I had a meeting with the minister, and I said, we cannot wait 10 years again. You do the plan and wait, and after 10 years you don't do anything. And he promised me that what they're going to do now is take all the steps and implement them as they come out of the report. So the first report will come out with the bus lanes. So we have bus lanes now.
Which will only work if they are enforced. You know, it's like the parking on the double yellow lines on 2-lane roads. It's not free parking with your hazard lights flashing to say, I'm only going to be 5 minutes, and nobody can pass, and buses wouldn't be able to. So there's a lot of other things you've got to sort out.
Yeah, but the priority is public transport and all that comes with it. Public transport is very important, and you can say it has to do with climate change policies as well as air quality. I say climate change policies because we need to reduce the amount of CO2 and climate change gases. We have 50% of all the gases that affect the climate are due to the lack of public transport. So it has this, we have this responsibility because both of climate and matters of health, public health. So this is why this is very high on the agenda. With regards to the environment, we have to push for better management of nature reserves, protection of nature. We have to have better laws with regards to animal welfare.
So those two come together with the fact that, as far as I'm aware, there's a new bill before Parliament to reduce the penalty for trapping birds.
We have unbelievable problems with regards to the birds and the hunters and all this. First of all, the big issue with the hunters that we are fighting every Wednesday is the fact that they oppose. We have a proposal, and this is what I am pushing for, that you shouldn't be allowed to keep your dog in a cage. They fight this fiercely. So we have an issue there. The other issue is that there are certain birds that if you shoot them, you pay a very high fine. But if they sit on lime sticks, I think they call them, the penalty is much lower.
Which is ridiculous because lime sticking is illegal.
Yes, but there are members of parliament, political parties, that they actually separated the lime stick issue, and they have lower fines for the lime sticks. And
well, it's nice to know some of our MPs are upholding the law, is all I can say, Bambos. I mean, this comes up year after year after year. Let's move on from that. You were talking about animal welfare, the environment. Now, I know the coasts are another thing that you are very, very passionate about.
We have the integrated coast management that we had to implement. It's the Barcelona Convention that was signed by the European Union, and we have to enforce it.
Many years ago.
2011, actually. And what this convention says is that anything you do to the coast, you have to do an environmental impact assessment study, and then you have to do a public consultation and prepare a presentation to let people know how this will affect the economy, how it will affect their social behavior, how it will affect any cultural issues that it might have, and of course the environment. And it should be done through public consultation.
when you say the coast in this sort of example, how far from the high tide line are we talking about? Because that is imperative, isn't it?
Of course. We are talking about the integrated coast zone management system. So the definition is that how far into the sea does the coast affect the sea, and how far into the land does the sea affect the coast. So this is how it's defined, and it actually says that it cannot be less than 100 meters into the coast. So at least 100 meters is defined, but it might be more. How deep into the land does the sea affect?
So that basically means that any development that we've seen that is within 100 meters of the beach,
yes,
or the rocks,
yes,
because I'm talking
breakwaters,
particularly
yes,
about the Peja area,
of course, yes,
they're illegal.
yeah.
How did they get planning permission?
Because this is what the Barcelona Convention says. The European Union forces us to implement it, but we have no law to introduce this into our national legislation. So they are discussing it.
Have we ratified the convention?
No, but we had to 9 years ago. We had to do it 9 years ago, and it didn't do it.
Are we getting any penalties for not having done it?
I don't know how we managed up to now to get away with it. And what I feel is that all these works that happens on the coast, they are focusing on the coast. What they want to do on the coast, they want to do real estate development now, like they did the golf courses. What they want to do, if you look at the new tourist policy, they want to develop holiday villages on the coast with a private beach. If you look at the marine spatial planning implementation that we had for Cyprus, marine spatial planning is like town planning on land. You do this planning on the sea. We're forced by an EU directive to do this. Marine spatial planning, when the law came to Parliament, they had in it a reference saying that if I want to do anything on the coast that will give me economic advantages, I will do it no matter what. I was instrumental in changing this, and I put in the phrase that appears in the Integrated Coastal Zone Management from the Barcelona Convention that says that you have to do environmental impact assessment, you look at how it will affect culture, society, and economy, the four pillars. So now they came back and they want to remove that again and do this if it's economically viable, and I won't care for anything else.
When we say they,
government. I can tell you, and I can give you another two examples of how they are actually focusing on the coast. Around 3 years ago, they came up with this idea that if you have a forest area, and I need to explain that the forest area in Cyprus, it's the area that I define as forest area, whether it has trees or not. And this is what every country does, because if you define a forest area, only the area with the trees, then you set the trees on fire, like they did in the older days in Greece.
Okay.
And then automatically you don't have a forest, no reason for protection. So in Cyprus, from the time of the English rule, we say that forestry area is the area I define as forestry area, full stop, no matter what it has in it. We have certain areas that actually they come to the sea. So they came up with this brilliant idea that they came to Parliament and said, I'm the forestry department. I don't want to manage beach or a coastal zone. What I want to do is I want to give all the coastal zone and all the beaches that I have on forest areas to private organizations to develop it, to municipalities to put umbrellas and stuff, and if there is a telecommunications company that wants to put underwater cables, etc. So this is what they came up. And I asked officially, what are these coastal areas, these beaches that are actually forest areas? And anybody can check on the website of the parliamentary website here in Nicosia that the reply was all the beaches in Agamas. They wanted to give the beaches in Agamas to villages and private companies. The Asudi area in Limassol, which is a unique place in Cyprus, it's 1.5 kilometers long forest along the beach. There is no other place in Cyprus like this.
There used to be a small area in between Larnaca and Decalia years ago, but I think they chopped all the trees down.
They chopped the trees down, yes. Yeah. And there is the area of Kornos in Ayanapa. So these were the areas that they wanted to give it out to developers.
And presumably the Polis campsite as well. That's got trees very close to the beach.
Yes. That is managed by, it belongs to the forest that rents it out. Forestry department that rents it out. So is the Sudi. It rents it out bits and pieces. And Gornos. And I repeat, all the beaches in Agama, the protected beaches with the turtles and all this. The next thing they came up with, that was dropped. After a very heated discussion in Parliament, you can imagine.
I can imagine.
The other invention that they came up with is that they said, unfortunately I couldn't stop this, they said that if you extend land into the sea, either you build a breakwater into the sea, automatically they can define it as a port. And if you define it as a port, it's no longer a public beach. And if it's no longer a public beach, I can give it to individuals to manage it. So it's a side way of privatizing beaches.
We're very good, it seems to me, Vamos, at sideways a lot of things here in Cyprus. We're going to have to wrap this up shortly.
Okay.
So just, if you will, encapsulate for me how you're going to go on from here. You mentioned that there are elections coming up next year, and I'm sure that you've got to start putting out policy documents, because the problem here very often is that politicians just talk to people and say, oh, I'll do this and I'll do this. But there are no written policy documents, which I presume with your history you would stick to. It's very unusual in Cyprus. Sorry, it is.
Thank you.
So what would be your top priorities on a policy document for the Green Party?
I mentioned already air quality, public transport, nature protection, animal care. We want to look at policies, green policies that would generate jobs. We have this money coming in, the 2 billion plus money that we have from the European Union.
The Recovery Fund.
The Recovery Fund, which has a green label attached to it.
Have you got proposals for that? Do you know how you'd like it spent?
We have documents. I'm reading certain documents on how to do this with a green agenda with that. So these documents explain how to generate jobs. We have experiences in the past with that. I can give you an example. For instance, in Germany, when they wanted to generate jobs, they did a very wide and extended energy renovation of the houses. So you generated jobs. And you won because you reduced the amount of energy demand. So
you're talking about the possibility of, in a sense, giving grants to fund making the old housing stock more energy efficient.
Yes, this is one of the most popular policies that would generate jobs of all sorts, and it will save money and it's good for the climate. The other thing is, of course, distributing renewable energy systems. And then you have to look into policies that would generate jobs, like, for instance, the waste management, the tires, and the organic waste collection and stuff like that. We have to deal with certain things like, for instance, what do we do for culture? The people of culture, we need to change certain things about how they pay their taxes and their social insurance because they don't have a steady income. And we have to look into society, what do the youth do, how they spend their summer holidays, their spare time, that is, their studies. We need to introduce a system where we have education which is not only university-based, but education which is professional education, like professional plumbers,
so internships, apprenticeships, and things like that.
Yes, like that, the professional side of the training system. And of course, look into a more fair economy that will help the local community and look into the difficulties that people have in finding houses. We need to introduce social housing and have policies for that, and all these issues that have to do with work and house.
It's a very, very big workload, but we've been talking on this week's programme to the brand new leader of the Green Party in Cyprus, Charalambos Theobemptou. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.